Good morning. My name is Marcus Eriksen. I'm from the Five Gyres Institute. I want to talk a little bit about plastics in the world's oceans. And I'll start with a little story because I love coming here to San Pedro and Long Beach because of some history here. So about 10 years ago, we built a homemade boat. Some of you may know about the junk raft. We took 15,000 plastic bottles, put them into fishing nets. We had found fishing nets in all the marinas around Southern California and made these long, 30-foot long pontoons, about 1 meter in diameter, 30 feet long. 6 of these giant socks filled with 15,000 plastic bottles. And for a cabin, we chose a lightweight, water-resistant, built-for-speed cabin. It was the fuselage of a Cessna 310 aircraft. And then we went to every other marina in Long Beach and San Pedro and down south and found all these broken sailboats, cut the masts off, and laid the masts 10 long and 10 wide, tied them all together, put the bottles under, the airplane on top, one A-frame, a square piece of sail we found in a dumpster, and called it junk. And 10 years ago, we were towed 60 miles offshore and let go. No motor. We wanted to follow the path of trash. Where does trash go? That leaves Long Beach, leaves Los Angeles, leaves continental coastlines. So follow the path and show by example where our trash goes. We thought it would take us maybe 3-4 weeks, if we're unlucky, maybe 5 or 6 weeks to get from here to Hawaii, to ride the California current south, catch the equatorial currents and the trade winds and get to Hawaii. 13 weeks later, we hobble into Waikiki. I've lost 20 pounds of weight. I was sick of mahi-mahi and kashi cereal. We had lots and lots of that. So that was the beginning of our organization, the Five Gyres Institute. But at that time, we were focused on a couple of big ideas. One was, 10 years ago, there were very few people talking about trash in the world's oceans. There was all this attention driven toward these fictional islands of trash, these garbage patches that float between California and Hawaii. So our initial objective was just bring attention to not just this gyre, but the world's gyres. There are 5 subtropical gyres, each of them in the South Pacific, North and South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, that become these little accumulation zones of our trash. And our raft was a demonstration of that. So I'll tell you one other story. So the raft, we built it here in Long Beach, right in front of the aquarium. So Jerry Schubel, who runs the aquarium, said, go ahead, build that raft, it'll be great. A month later, we had just barricades and a pile of bottles. He'd come down and say, are you guys done yet? My board members don't like this big heap of trash in front. It took us about 2 months to build the raft, 3 months to sail it. But I remember at one point, a little girl came up to the raft and said, are you guys going to glue the caps on the bottles? And I was like, nah, I've done it before. You know, the tight cap keeps the carbonated liquids inside. I can make it tight enough, it'll be just fine. Well, on day 3 of the voyage, we had our worst storm, was day 3. And we had easily 50-knot winds, 50-knot gusts, and 8 to 10-foot swells just rocking our raft all around. And the next morning, I step out of the raft. And there's one point where one wave hit the airplane and moved it across the deck 1 foot. We had like toe straps holding it down, sort of. And I knew if we went overboard in that airplane, we were going straight to the sea floor. But in the morning, we wake up, straps are loose, but I step into water. So the raft sunk about 18 inches overnight, which if you're a sailor, you don't want to lose that much freeboard in one event. Something was wrong. So I look and I realize that the bottles are filling full of water. They're deflating and they were capsizing. So I called my wife, Anna Cummins, the co-founder of Five Gyres. At that time, we had just gotten engaged. And I said, hey, babe, we're sinking. And she's sitting in Santa Monica at Pete's Coffee with her mother. I could hear her mom in the background saying, well, go get him. Go get your man. So she did. She chartered a dive boat, and the dive company owner and 5 volunteers all came together, left at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd been calling Anna on a satellite phone saying, I need this, I need more glue, I need glue, just glue to glue the caps back on. And I need more vegetables and more beer and more food because it's gonna be a long journey. And then she shows up at 6 a.m. And we spent that entire day with all the volunteers on this raft. I mean, it's listing and sort of half sunk. And we took 1/3 of the bottles, 5,000 bottles, and 2 long pontoons on top of the deck. And just as fast as we could, pulled the bottles out, poured the water out, glued the cap back on, and put it back in the pontoon. I did that every day for the next 3 months. With glue, yes. My morning regimen was, okay, look around, see what's falling apart today, and go find 10 bottles and pour the water out, put the caps back on. So the point is just listen to everyone. Everyone has great advice. That helps you get along in life. It all turned out to be a book that just came out about that junk raft adventure. Looks like a boat. I would never sail this thing again. But this, like I said, it launched our organization, the Five Gyres Institute. We have a table back there. Haley is showing some of the stuff we found in the world's oceans. It launched an organization that had a singular question: what is in the world's oceans? And so Ann and I, we had not run an expedition before. We had been with Captain Charles Moore, who's also based here in Long Beach, the Algalita Foundation. We had gone with him on one expedition. We now had the junk raft under our belts. And we found a vessel and we charted an ocean crossing voyage from Bahamas to Bermuda across to the Azores. And there was nothing known in the Eastern Atlantic, North Atlantic. There had been a bunch of work on the west side. Same in the Pacific. There was nothing on Japan's side. It was all kind of on this side. Charles Moore doing much of that work. In the Southern Hemisphere, there was one study. One guy in 1980 had done some work in the South Pacific near Cape Town, collected maybe a dozen samples. And that was it. So a lot of unknowns. 5 ocean gyres, 5 potential accumulation zones of trash, and very little knowledge about the Northern Hemisphere. So we took off. It was January 10th, we left Bermuda. We learned very quickly not to sail North Atlantic in January. We had 2 major low-pressure systems come together, form this massive storm that overtook us. And once it was over, we still had the waves. I remember on the first day that it was over, we still had like 40 or 45-foot swells coming in. That would just drown the boat. We were just laughing as swimming pool-sized barrels of water would dump into our laps. We're all tied to the deck. But that was the first of about 17 expeditions now, having gone around the world. It took us 5 years, 17 expeditions, over 200 sailors have joined us to then take all of our data, all this new data, and the work of Charles Moore and Woods Hole and other colleagues, Francois Galgani in the Mediterranean, Julia Reiser had gone around Australia, Martin Thiel off the coast of Chile, got a lot of data, and in 2014 published the first estimate of all plastics of all sizes in all oceans. In that estimate, first of all, our maps, they show where the accumulation zones are. And the hotspots are not just in the 5 gyres. The Bay of Bengal, we had sailed from Sri Lanka to Thailand, and there was a hotspot there. The South China Sea is a hotspot. The Mediterranean also is a hotspot. So much coastal pressure leaking trash into that closed basin. So our first estimate was 250,000 tons of trash from 5.25 trillion particles. 92% were smaller than a grain of rice. So we sort of thought this is an opportunity to clarify that misconception of islands in the oceans. Because it sure is making a lot of people think that all we have to do is go get it, and it's over. Problem solved. So our research, and the current research happening now, is showing a wide distribution of plastics. Here's what we're finding in the last few years of research papers coming out of surveys in some remote parts of the world, from the equator up to the Arctic and high mountain lakes. A wide distribution of small particles. There have been microplastics found frozen in sea ice, on the seafloor almost everywhere we look, on beaches worldwide, in the high atmosphere. Small fibers are abundant. There was one study just last year where they put stainless steel funnels on rooftops in Paris and found a fallout of microfibers. We're finding microfibers or microplastics in over 1,200 species to date, have been found with trash either in their bodies or tangled around their bodies. So we're seeing how pervasive it is, how broken down it is. So the narrative flip is taking us away from the idea of garbage patches, more to the idea of a smog of small particles. And it makes the most sense. If you think of smog over our skies in the 70s, you'd look up and you'd say, okay, there is a wide distribution of this fine particulate, and each tiny particle has its own burden of toxicity. In the oceans, it's kind of the same way. You have trillions of small particles widely distributed from pole to pole across the equator, everywhere. It's tiny, it's mostly tiny, and each small fragment is carrying its own burden of toxicity as it absorbs all these persistent chemicals that are out in the oceans, like PCBs and pesticides, flame retardants, other hydrocarbons. So the narrative, what we push is that it should flip. Instead of plastic islands, plastic soup, plastic smog. And if you think of how we dealt with smog in our skies, people's minds went right to prevention. It wasn't about, get vacuum cleaners on skyscrapers and suck up all the smog in the sky. It was, let's make better filters on cars and, put scrubbers and smokestacks on coal-burning power plants. The narrative shifted. So I urge you to think of it the same way. And when people ask about it, that there isn't this garbage patch that's growing, it's a smog of small particles that's everywhere. So where are we now? Having done all this work in the ocean, one of our big lessons are, if you keep on studying what's in the middle of the ocean, and you find all this stuff, you really don't know where it came from. Which country? You don't know which company either. It is the ultimate tragedy of the commons. That was our discovery. We published our research about it, but the reality is we're probably not going to gain a whole lot more by going way out to the deep sea. If you want to understand what it is, you've got to go upstream. And our success we often talk about is when we went to Great Lakes. In 2013, we sailed the Great Lakes along with Sherry Mason from New York University in Fredonia. We had an expedition, we brought our nets, did our surface sampling. We were finding more particles per count than our ocean samples. Just thousands of particles. One sample had 1,200 little small bits of plastic, which really surprised us. What was interesting is that a lot of those particles were perfectly little round little spheres. And you all know what those are. Microbeads. The microbeads you've heard about, that was the first evidence of microbeads actually in the marine environment. And we documented a lot of microbeads. We could trace them back to the products. So we were surprised how quickly this campaign kind of took off. We had organizers already working on this issue. We had some scientific evidence. It was an amazing example of tremendous collaboration. You had Surfrider, Heal the Bay. You had organizations across the country, over 50 organizations, all sharing the same sample legislation, all sharing the same videos and photographs and talking points and staying in close communication, and some really savvy campaigners working on the policy side. We got 2 senators on board, and then about 2.5 years after publication of that paper, President Obama signed the Microbead Free Waters Act. It's a huge success. But it was a testament to collaboration, also to the fact that it was bringing the tragedy of the commons back to where we can do something about it. That land to sea connection. And that's kind of where the work is now, trying to understand that land to sea connection. And that's where this idea of the ban list came into being. So ban list stands for Better Alternatives Now. Ban list 1.0 was last year, focused on California, trash on the ground in California only. And we were using data sets from many organizations, like the Ocean Conservancy has International Coastal Cleanup Day. NOAA has data on trash on the ground. Marine Debris Tracker, a mobile app. Literati, also a mobile app that allows you to photograph trash, but also add the brand if you had the data. All this data, we merged them together in California, California-only data, and they came up with the top 20 list. And it was a good tool in that it showed us here in California where our targets should be. Should it be plastic bags? Should it be foam polystyrene or straws? The answer is yes, all of the above. And the ban list kind of showed that hierarchy of which are the biggest polluters, by these product categories. And also allowed us to begin to look at not just banning individual products, but also looking at suites of products. Like Malibu just banned a few different items together Seattle has done the same thing. And also take a look at brands. So I'm going to share with you a band list. Let's see, where are we showing? Right here. Okay, so it's already up here. So band list, again, band list 2.0, we did the same thing, but then chose to look at all of the United States. So it's a US data set and looking at multiple sources of data, put them together to get the top 20. And then with Literati, Literati is the only source here in the United States that's looking at trash on the ground and saying, there's a straw, it has little yellow and red stripes, it's McDonald's. Or it's green, it's Starbucks. So Literati is the only opportunity now to document the brands, which I think is very important going forward. And the third thing, very interesting, is a look at bioplastic. When you think of alternatives, what we thought was people really jumped to bioplastic. Let's use those corn cups at our parties and all this stuff that you see at every eco event that you go to these days. We took 20 of those products, bioplastic products, put them in a milk crate, and again here in Long Beach, we sunk them under Charles Moore's dock for 2 years, put like 10 bricks in the milk crate to see what happens. Then took the same 20 and put in my backyard, buried that deep for 2 years. And the idea was to mimic what happens when these bioplastics get lost in the environment. Because everyone thinks, and they're marketed to tell you, they go away. They magically disappear. And we found something interesting I'll show you. Okay, just to start with band lists. So we have these top products, these product categories, and those are typical on many of the sort of data sheets you get when you do like coastal cleanup, other cleanup events. Those events are hosted by groups like Surfrider, Coastal Cleanup, NOAA has theirs. A bunch of organizations are doing this kind of work. Keep America Beautiful has theirs, although their data was very different from these data sets. We couldn't merge them. So again, we merged 6 different data sets. They were the ones that are closest. And we came up with a top 20 list for the entire United States. And again, how this is useful, it's going to allow us to group them together. We need to group product categories together. Going after a bag ban, a straw ban, these one-off product bans, is not matching, it's not a solution that matches the scale of the problem and the speed at which single-use plastics are being produced and distributed and lost to the sea. We've got to capture not just the product, but the concept, the single-use throwaway concept. There's a lot of effort here in California, as you know, on polystyrene bans and straws by request. Industry loves, it's almost their suggestion, straws by request. We got to go for an outright ban for plastic straws. But the suggestion here is that here are the top 20, let's bundle them in a dozen products or all at one time. But thanks to Literati, and we were able to get some brand data. Now, one caveat, we got very little data. It's hard to identify brands on most things. Some things are so generic, like utensils, pretty generic. Can you see this, or is it pretty blurry? Pretty tiny print. Well, it's online. I urge you all to download this. There's no charge, but the point here isn't the small print here, although it's interesting. The point is that we need to get brands. As soon as you identify brands, the brands sort of wake up. That's a brand risk. And one thing I noticed at a big conference a week and a half ago, 6IMDC, the 6th International Marine Debris Conference, the plenary session and other sessions were often highlighting the efforts of a few countries, primarily from the Southeast Asia region. And the reason why they were so prominent at this huge international conference is the last few years of research, last 2 years, have published papers that list the top 20 polluting countries. That was Jenna Jambeck's paper. A year later, the top 20 polluting rivers. That was Lauren LeBreton's paper. You get in these top lists. It's calling out countries for their contribution. And the countries see it as national identity, but also, I'm sure there's some economic fallout. Indonesia, I saw a couple papers, articles this morning about how they're cleaning up plastics because our tourism is so important to us. So you're seeing countries react because they're getting called out. Not in a negative way, just with the facts. Here are, based on our modeling, where the trash is coming from. We have to approach brands in the same way. Not really to call them out or shame the brands, but when you get a list of brands, the brands respond because they recognize risk. If there's no risk, then changing and spending money to change isn't always a priority. So I think it's very important that we call out brands from now going forward. We're going to do this ban list again, ban list 3.0. We'll have this, plus some focus on Southeast Asia. But going forward, if you are part of an organization that does collection of trash on the ground, if you could add into that the opportunity for your collectors, your beach cleaners, to label brands, that'd be tremendously helpful, I think, to the movement as it goes forward. I can read some. They're all different categories. For example, for straws and stirrers, Starbucks, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, Burger King, and Subway. That's a list of 1 to 5. We need more data. This isn't, as a statistician will say, it's not representative. Not yet. That's the caveat. So I want to talk about this study. It was really interesting. So Charles Moore let me put this crate of bioplastics, and it was all products that you see in the market, PLA-lined cups, PLA straws, PLA cups. We had some PHA products. That's a whole different bioplastic material. Then we had some biopolymers, which call themselves bioplastics, but they're making the exact same kind of plastic you get from petroleum. You can make polyethylene, polypropylene, PET from either a bunch of corn stalks or fossil fuels. It's still PET, polypropylene, polyethylene. Those are biopolymers. But the true bioplastics, like PLA is degradable, but they'll say compostable, but the small print, only if that gets collected and put into a municipal composting facility where it's high heat, high humidity, and lots of bacteria. But the public thinks if it's lost on the ground, it's going to go away. It's not going to harm animals or wildlife. So we put all those products in this crate. And interesting, after 2 years, if you look at this photograph, the first picture in that lineup of shots, the first one is the original product. The second is 6 months in the ground. The third is 1 year in the ground. The fourth is 2 years in the ground. And the last one, 2 years in the ocean. So it's the last 2 photographs to really pay attention to. 2 years in the ocean, 2 years in the ground. The Ziploc bag began to fragment. I think that was the oxidegradable bag. And you don't want oxidegradables at all. In fact, Europe is going to ban oxidegradables. There's talk across Europe to do that because it isn't degradation. They add a starch material that makes the polyethylene bag fragment quicker. So you make a lot of microplastic fragments quicker. The PE bag, the dog poop bag, didn't degrade. The one that performed fairly well was down here, the green bag. That's a bio bag. You're seeing cities begin to use this now to collect food scraps in their curbside recycling of organic waste. They're using that bag. After a few weeks, it begins to fall apart. So you got to use it quick. Don't let it sit and stay wet for too long. Diapers and wipes. By and large, most of the wipes disappeared. Diapers did not. There's too much chemistry in those and laminates of materials. This was interesting. This is now looking at the ones that we commonly see, cups, straws, and utensils. These are PLA and some paper. So that common PLA corn cup you see, 2 years in the ocean, 2 years on land, nothing happened to it. Some breakage, but by and large, the volume was still there. For these coffee cups, these are pretty common. A paper cup with either a PLA or a polyethylene liner. In both cases, 2 years, the paper's gone, but the plastic is still there. 2 years in both environments, land and sea. The paper straw was gone. That's from Aardvark straws, been around since 1888. They're making a massive comeback now. The PLA straw, nothing, unchanged. The utensils, unchanged completely. So the point here is that we may have this list of better alternatives now. That list tells us which are the biggest polluters. Bioplastics are not a functional alternative to single-use throwaway plastics. Makes the point. Right on cue. I couldn't have planned that better. And the last are a few other miscellaneous products. The one I'll point to is this little cup right here. This blue cup is the only PHA product. PHA is made from the off-gassing of the fermentation process. It's not PLA, which is made from plant material. This is bacteria. So what happens is, we found on land it was all pitted and cracked. It's a thick, thick plastic cup. In the ocean, after 2 years, it was gone. And the PHA manufacturers, they tell us that PHA has value, primarily probably in aquaculture or closing fish traps and so forth. So again, the takeaways are, we got to group these products into like 4 or 5 products and ban those all together, not the single campaigns for single products. And bioplastics are not the alternative. If you download this, you'll see a long list of what the alternatives are. Most of you know what those are. So I'll wrap up real quick. I'm out of time. Wrap up real quick, and that is 5 gyres. What we're looking at next is that land-to-sea connection. Our next expedition is hugging the coast of Indonesia and working with scientists and campaigners on the ground to look at what are the leak points and what are the products that are causing that waste near shore. Focus on that land-to-sea connection. This is happening here as well. I know Algalita and 5 Gyres, Surfrider, we're constantly looking at the land-to-sea connection here. That's where the future is to end this problem, focus on land to save our seas. Thank you very much.